Thank you for that long introduction. In the Marine Corps for 13 years. I went to law school. A little side story in the law school. I graduated. I was on law review at Notre Dame, and I was in the same class as Amy Coney Barrett. Actually, I got to know her fairly well when I was at Notre Dame Law School. But I'm not a big fan of lawyers. I usually describe myself as a Marine with a law degree rather than a lawyer. You know, as a Marine officer, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Never thought I'd leave the Marine Corps to become a lawyer. But I remember coming home, it was after the Clinton election, and I told my wife, I was an instructor at the infantry officer course, that you know, our country's being destroyed, and it's not by Soviet Union, it's not by North Korea, it's by all these leftists in our courtrooms. And so I told her I'm going to law school. It's like, what? I'm going to law school. Never had law school in the horizon in my as a goal ever. And I went to law school, and now I'm doing this type of litigation, which I describe as lawfare. I've been doing it for 24 years now. So I work for the American Freedom Law Center. Let's talk about the weaponization of government, right? Lawfare. And we've witnessed it, as Marion mentioned, at the national level. You've seen what they're doing with President Trump, with these bogus felony charges in New York. You have the going after him for the classified documents. Meanwhile, he has them locked up in his place down in Mar-a-Lago, and President Biden has them loose in his garage in Delaware, and he's not being prosecuted because apparently he's not competent enough to be able to stand trial. But he's apparently competent enough to be president of the United States. So go figure on that one. But the weaponization of government, it's not hyperbole to say this is a serious direct threat to our constitutional republic. And here's one of the main culprits of this weaponization of government and lawfare. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. I have a lawsuit against him. I may have mentioned it, I think, the last time I spoke to this group on during one of these events. I'm representing a bunch of parents who sued him, the domestic terrorist parents. We all remember with great public fanfare in October of 2021, he issued this memorandum where he had his criminal investigation division and his counterterrorism division create these threat tags for these parents who were being a little too vocal at these school board meetings because they were protesting these left-wing progressive policies that are being forced upon them. And I think most of you probably follow the politics, and you know how important that parental rights issue was in Virginia. In fact, I think that's what turned the governor's race to Republican in Virginia. And so the left realizes that this is a serious issue for them. And so this is, Merrick Garland gets out there and with great public fanfare issues this, announcement that all these threats are taking place at these school board meetings. He's going to get his FBI, his Department of Justice, his law enforcement, all involved in this. And you got to ask yourself a question. What jurisdiction does the Attorney General have to meddle in a local school board matters? Zero. And that's why it was important with this domestic terrorist. You remember this was widely reported. We have emails and things that support this. What was the genesis for him making that big public announcement going after the school boards was a letter written by a handful of progressive members of the National School Boards Associations where they sent this to the White House, and we have reports and evidence that the Biden White House, they collaborated with the School Board Association to draft this letter to be a pretext to then have Merrick Garland go out there and say, look, we got all these domestic terrorists going after these school boards, and we got to do something about it. And we know what the purpose of this is. This is a shot across the bow to silence people, silence those in opposition. That's what this is all about. This targeting of individuals, and it's happened at the national level with Trump. It's happening here against these parents. We sued in federal court in Washington, D.C. They dismissed our case on standing grounds, which anybody who follows the law knows if it's a hot potato case, that's the easiest way for them to get rid of it and say, oh, there's not really a harm here to you, even though it's a direct harm against their right to freedom of speech, and he's designating these parents as domestic terrorists and federal criminals. And so we appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which anybody know what court Merrick Garland came from before he became Attorney General? He came from the U.S. District Court for the D.C. Circuit, and they affirmed, no big surprise, had a bunch of his colleagues as our panel. So he recently filed a petition for a writ of certiorari in the U.S. Supreme Court, asking the court to take this thing up because it's a very important case to stop the weaponization of government, especially at the highest levels. And the Solicitor General, they have an option, and what they exercise it here, they filed just a simple waiver. It was basically a one-pager motion to the notice to the Supreme Court saying, nothing to see here. We're going to waive even filing a response to this petition. Well, at least one of the justices, this is on his radar because he directed the Solicitor General to file a response. Right? When the Supreme Court directs the Solicitor General to actually respond to an issue, that means at least somebody's paying attention to it up there. And so they did that, and last week I filed my reply brief, so I think it's going to go to conference in September. That will be very interesting if the Supreme Court actually decides to take up this case. So keep this one in your prayers. These things ain't over, and I don't quit. I never quit, and I'm going to keep fighting until the last judge tells me that this is over. This is a very recent case. You may have seen it in the news. It comes out of Oakland County. The Andrew Hess, who was at a election recount in December of last year in Oakland County, and there was all sorts of shenanigans going on there. He was one of the public watchers, observers of the recount. There were multiple challenges that were being made to the conduct of the recount. Every one of them was blown off. Joe Rozelle, who's the director of elections for Oakland County, paid no attention to what was going on. A lot of the people there were getting angry with what was happening. And he's, right now, Andrew Hess is a 38-year-old young man with a wife and 2 young children, and he's being charged with making a terrorist threat during this election recount, which is a 20-year felony by the Oakland County prosecutor. This is outrageous, and I'm going to go through the elements here because it's important to understand this case. You may have seen it in the news. It's been in the news quite a bit. This happened in December 15th of 2023. He wasn't charged until April 6th. Right? So much for a big threat to anybody. Yeah. This is a terrorist threat. This is a 20-year felony. There's various elements. This is what the courts have said. It needs to be a serious expression of an intent to commit an act of terrorism. I'm going to go through some of these elements here, and I know some of these slides might be kind of busy, but it's important. Hang with me here because it's so important, because this is the law that they have to apply to the facts of this case. And we already had, he surrendered himself on the warrant because he didn't want Oakland County Sheriff showing up at his house and throwing him in handcuffs in front of his kids. So I went with him down to court. He turned himself in on the warrant. They released him, thankfully, on a personal recognizance bond, so he's free right now. Although it's a $20,000 bond in case, if he absconds, can't leave the state. Had to turn over his firearm. He had to go turn in his concealed pistol license to Oakland County. It was just absurd, right? And the guy's innocent, but he's still got to give up these constitutional rights. So we had our first day of the preliminary examination on May 30th, and it's going to be continued on September 6th. So we're in the midst of this. For those who don't know, if you're charged with a felony offense, you get a chance to have a preliminary examination, which Marion knows with the being part of on the criminal side. And then if the district court judge binds you over, as it were, meaning there's probable cause for a felony, it goes up to the circuit court where you're being tried on the felony, and there'll be an opportunity to what's called quash the bind over as well. But to be a terrorist threat, it has to be a serious expression of intent to commit an act of terrorism. And this is language out of some of the Supreme Court cases to protect the right to freedom of speech. So what's an act of terrorism? And this again is an important point. It has to be a willful and deliberate act that is a violent felony, and here's the most important part. It has to be for the purpose intended to intimidate or coerce a population or a unit of government by intimidation or coercion. Right? This is what an act of terrorism is. You want to influence somebody. So the alleged threat. So this is what happens. You have this recount going on in the recount room in the Oakland County courthouse, and there's a lot of challenges going on. Nobody's paying attention to the challenges. And he walks out of the recount room into a practically empty lobby. He had one other buddy that walked out with him at the time, and apparently there was some secretary sitting over on the other side of the room who says she heard Andy say, "Hang Joe for treason." That's it. Out in an empty lobby, he makes an offhand comment, hang Joe for treason. Political hyperbole at best. Doesn't come close to being the elements of a terrorist threat. And certainly, and he was confronted by the police. After this witness said, I heard him make this terrorist threat, she went and made a complaint to the Oakland County Sheriffs. They went in, they asked Andy sitting there, you can tell on the GoPro camera of the police officer. He's in there just looking on his phone. The officer calls him out and he said, we got a complaint that you made a terrorist threat. And he's like checking himself, a terrorist threat. He said, at best, I accused the guy of a crime. I didn't threaten anybody's life. In my view, if you cheat on elections, that's treason. You should be prosecuted for treason. And so he makes this statement to the police officer. They get all the written statements. He makes a written statement right there, and they let him back into the election room, right, where Joe Rozelle is and everybody. If this is a serious expression of intent to commit an act of terrorism, the guy he allegedly said he was going to hang. And again, talk about political hyperbole. When people say, you can go online right now on Amazon, whatever, and get, buy hang Joe Biden, for treason T-shirts, or hang Trump for treason T-shirts. I mean, it's political hyperbole. It's like in the category of, tar and feather. It's just absurd that this is somehow a terrorist threat in the Oakland County prosecutor's mind. And this is the other component of this. The statement, as a matter of law, for this thing to be a felony offense, it must have been made under circumstances where a reasonable person would think that others may take the threat seriously as expressing the intent to inflict the harm or damage, the act of terrorism. So you have the Oakland County Sheriffs. There's like 8 of them there. They're all, standing there with their arms folded. Nobody's arrested. Nobody's taken out. They allow him to go back in. He gives a public speech during the public comment period with Joe Rozelle right there, the guy who apparently he's, threatening to hang. It's absurd. This lady, the secretary who's out there, Miss Howard, she's the only witness they have to make this complaint. Now this is just a kicker. I mean, it's unbelievable. She's in the lobby. She's a receptionist. She's behind a plexiglass. I think she had a mask on too, for goodness sakes. And she was examined during the preliminary examination, she said no, she wasn't part of the conversation, so he wasn't directing it at her. He was just saying it in an empty lobby, not to any. There was no election official in the lobby. There was no government official in the lobby. If this is an act of terrorism, excuse the French, but Andy Hess sucks at being a terrorist. Yeah. I mean, what is this? She hears an offhand comment. She said it was in conversation tone, not even directed at her. So this was a question the prosecutor asked, and I guarantee you he was not expecting this answer. So he says, Mrs. Howard, question. After hearing the statement and the response was the buddy who was with him made some offhand comment like, that's too much. I mean, that was like it. So Andy walks out into this empty lobby, says, hang Joe for treason. His buddy says, that's a bit too much. She overhears this thing. So after hearing this statement, this response, what did you do? Now bear in mind, the Oakland County prosecutor knows all this before she even charges this case. It's absurd. Here's what her response was. Whoops, wrong way. Let's try this. There we go. Well, immediately, not much. I mean, I couldn't leave my position at the front desk. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. This is a serious expression of intent to commit a terrorist act. Their only witness. She finds it more important to be a receptionist and sitting at the front desk. I think the prosecutor was expecting, I ran off and called the sheriffs. And the sheriffs instituted all their, protocols for terrorism, cleared the building. It's a bomb threat or whatever. Nothing. They let him back into the hall. The guy's facing a 20-year felony for this nonsense. And what's this all about? Again, it's a shot across the bow. For all you people who are going to be, election watchers, poll watchers, and everything else, don't you dare criticize what we're doing at these elections. You be quiet, you sit on your heels, because you're going to find yourself in the same position as Andy Hess. Unbelievable. My blood boils when I recount this. And think about this guy with this 20-year felony hanging over his head. And his wife and his young kids with the 20-year felony hanging over his head. With the judge, just unbelievable. Every objection I make, it's overruled. Every objection the prosecutor makes, it's sustained. It was just like, you got to be kidding me. So hopefully they don't bind it over. I don't hold out a whole lot of hope. If they do bind it over, I'm going to file a motion to quash the bind over. If that is denied, I'm going into federal court. I know there's a younger abstention doctrine which prohibits you to federal courts to interfere with ongoing state court proceedings, but there are exceptions. There are exceptions when there's such an egregious violation of constitutional rights, and you're not going to get any justice in the state court. And I can't think of a better example of that in my 20-something years of litigating. So this is far from over that case, but man, it's just terrible. How many questions at the end, man, if you don't mind? Next case, United States for Citizens for a Pro-Life Society. This is a civil case, and some of you probably watched the news with how the Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice, is using the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act to go after peaceful pro-lifers at abortion centers, which really amount to a peaceful trespass. But like in Washington, D.C., and I know I've represented a lot of the individuals that were arrested there in the past, that should have been, at best, even face, if there's no violence and no harm done, it's a misdemeanor. But they charged as a felony, and how they made it even worse is they added on a conspiracy to violate civil rights. And the civil right, because this is post-Roe in the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe since there's no constitutional right to abortion, but the judge held that seeking medical care was a civil right that's covered by the statute. So that turned it into a 10-year felony. I know one of the, Lauren Handy, whom I've represented in a rescue up in Flint, Michigan, she got 4 years. Sitting in jail for 4 years for peaceful protests at an abortion center, which should have been a misdemeanor trespass at best. It's unbelievable what they're doing. And there was a report, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act was interesting when it was passed. It was passed principally to stop the rescues that are often called lock and blocks, where bodies will be in front of the doors or they'll put padlocks on. But it also, the way they got this passed through is they had language in there you couldn't do similar conduct at a church, place of religious worship, or it would apply to like a crisis pregnancy center. Well, we saw after Dobbs, I mean, there were Catholic churches that were attacked. You had crisis pregnancy centers that were arson, that bombs thrown at them, arson, burned down, everything. Department of Justice did nothing. They all could have been charged on the FACE, and they did nothing. In fact, I think Breitbart just had a story that came out about FACE, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act, and said that 97% of the cases brought under this are brought against pro-lifers. In this case, I'm representing, I don't know if any of you know here, Monica Miller, because she's one of the defendants in this case, and Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, which she runs, Red Rose Rescue. I'm representing Christopher Mozinski, who is Father Fidelis. If any of you know him, he's a Franciscan friar of the Renewal from New York. He's involved in a lot of rescues. Interestingly, this case, and I want to cover FACE just real briefly. Again, the elements are, gosh, one of these days I'll get this thing right. You have to use force, threat of force, or physical obstruction to intentionally injure, intimidate, or interfere with somebody that's going to have an abortion. Intimidate means to place a person in reasonable apprehension of bodily harm, right? So you have to make some sort of threat against them. And physical obstruction means you have to render impassable entry to or entry out of the facility itself, or make it particularly hazardous to travel to the facility. So this is what the elements that are required. And the thing that's interesting is under FACE, there's civil provisions and there's criminal provisions, but the elements are exactly the same. So if they can prosecute successfully this case civilly, then they could also do it criminally. And it's interesting that they chose to do this one civilly, which has draconian civil penalties. Just there's statutory damages, there's compensatory damages, there's injunctive relief, there's all sorts of damages they face, as well as attorney's fees and the likes. So this, if they can bring this case civilly, they can bring it criminally. Now the local prosecutor prosecuted this case with Father Fidelis. He was found guilty of a simple trespass, was given a probation sentence, and that was it. But yet the federal government now is coming in and going after, and they waited till almost the last day of the statute of limitations for them to even bring this civil case. Again, if they can bring this civil case, if they can fit these facts into the civil case, they can do it. They can do it criminally. What they want to do is they want to shut down these Red Rose rescues. If any of you here are involved or familiar with that, the Red Rose Rescue, they purposely try to avoid violating FACE. Right? They know it requires a physical obstruction, that it requires a threat. It requires you to do something, prevent somebody going in, or to threaten somebody going in, to intimidate them. All they do is they peacefully walk into the abortion center. They hand out Red Rose Rescues. There's usually about 3 or 4 of them at most. Hand out Red Roses to the women there, and encourage them not to have an abortion. And usually the abortion center staff will come in and tell them to leave. They don't. They just go on their knees and they stop praying quietly. Then the police will come and they'll carry them out. And that's what happens uniformly throughout all these. And that's what happened in this case. Father Fidelis went in, handed out some red roses. He was in there for maybe 20 minutes at most. They cleared all the patients out. He went to his knees. He was praying. The police came, carried him out. He was prosecuted locally. Now he's facing a federal civil violation for this conduct. It's again, it's just them using the weapons, the power of government to go after them. This doesn't come close to a face violation. I showed you what the elements were. So we've already filed a motion to dismiss 2 weeks ago. I filed a motion to dismiss on behalf of Father Fidelis. All the others have filed as well. It's in the Northern District of Ohio. And it's interesting because the prosecutor of the Northern District of Ohio for the U.S. Attorney's Office seems to be kind of an average, decent enough person to deal with. But every time something comes up, she has to go to Washington D.C. to get her, instructions. So all the instructions are coming right out of Washington D.C. and in DOJ headquarters for this. We raised issues of federalism and 10th Amendment. Right? We have a federal government that's supposed to be of limited and enumerated powers for a reason. We have concepts of federalism. The Supreme Court has said time and again, what's truly local has to be local. What's truly national should stay national. This is a truly local, just simple misdemeanor trespass case that the federal government is trying to federalize, use federal law, and use the draconian penalties that come along with it. And we have the principles of federalism. The Supreme Court has said, including the 10th Amendment, when the federal government breaches that. Federalism and 10th Amendment aren't just to protect the rights of states. They're also, and this again is right out of a Supreme Court case, the Boyd case. The Supreme Court has said it also protects the liberty interests of the individual, which makes sense, right? When you think about our Constitution, the Constitution was designed to do 2 principal things: to protect liberty and to prevent tyranny. And it does it through the Bill of Rights. It does it through its structure, the separation of powers that you have, these concepts of federalism. The 10th Amendment specifically says the federal government, not the power of the federal government, belongs to the states and we the people. And so all of this is implicated by this case. So we'll see where this one goes. Like I said, we just filed a motion to dismiss on this one just, I think, 2 weeks ago. The Michigan fake electors civil case. I have the pleasure of representing these 4 civil defendants. Marianne, officially, Amy, Rose, and Hank. I don't know if you all know them. The 16 electors from Michigan, the Republican electors, as you all know, they're facing a criminal prosecution. I know several. I'm not directly involved in that. I know several of them had their preliminary examinations already, and I think Marianne and some others are still. Well, you had yours, or you did? Actually, you did. There's 3 others that I think it was 3 others that are still waiting to have theirs. So we'll see how that comes out. This is a civil case. 3 of the Biden electors sued the 16 electors in state court civilly. I mean, this. If I ever thought of bringing this type of lawsuit against somebody, I'd be sanctioned and it would be thrown out. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. And what the attorneys who brought this were banking on is they realized that, okay, these 16 electors are also facing criminal penalties. So when we, propound with them interrogatories and depositions and ask them questions, what are they going to do? I'm going to invoke my 5th Amendment because I have this criminal offense hanging over me, and that's what they were banking on, because under the civil law, you can still invoke your 5th Amendment, but it can be used against you, unlike on the criminal side. There can be a presumption against you for you're not willing to answer the case, and their whole case was based on that. We already filed a motion for summary disposition. We filed a motion to stay discovery. The judge denied it. She wouldn't rule on a motion for summary disposition. We appealed, and the Michigan Court of Appeals stayed it. So the civil case, and I think it's just going to be hanging up there, I think, until all the criminal stuff is done as it should, and then when it comes back down. But this case, I've seen a lot of frivolous cases in my life, and this one is right up there. This is the claims they brought and the relief they're seeking in this case. First, they want the court. They want this court to decide how many years later, right, after the election already took place, after the Biden electors already, submitted their votes, after Biden's already been elected president, they want a court to make a declaration that they were fake electors and we were the true electors. The problem with that is courts don't engage in advisory opinions on things that have no consequences. It's already over. There's nothing. This is absolutely moot. There's nothing you can get from a court for them to say other than whatever, I guess, for them to feel good. But that's not what courts do. Right? Courts decide cases, they decide controversies, certainly on the federal side, but there has to be a conflict. There's no conflict. Right? The 16 Trump electors, their votes weren't counted. The other 16 were counted. Biden won the election. End of story. Where's the issue? There is none. They're claiming that there was an invasion of privacy and false light by publicizing their fake elector certificates. This is language from their own. So think about it. These election certificates said nothing about any of these Biden electors. Nothing. Where's the false light? Where's the invasion of privacy from publicly submitting, your slate of electors, which were alternate electors? And by the way, there's a history for that too in prior elections. We have, and I know the electors were advised by some attorneys that, look, we have all these challenges that are going on, and we need to have the electors all set in case something gets overturned. And so our slate of electors are ready to go. But there's nothing that the slate of electors submitting did anything of invasion of privacy, false light. It's kind of like a defamation. How is that by submitting these and they weren't even counted, as we know? And then conversion. This one is, you got to scratch your head. The converting of property to the other person's own use. So somehow submitting the slate of votes, the elections, that this converted their property. Well, first of all, you don't have any property interest whatsoever in being an elector for an election. I mean, this is all very public. It's not private property. They're not converting anything. They're not taking anything for their own personal use, their own personal gain. And then to throw it all in, they said conspiracy. Problem with the conspiracy is to conspire to commit a violation of the law is you have to have a violation of the law to begin with. So if all these other claims fail, and they fail way worse than I can explain here in a short amount of time. You can go to our website, you can read our motion for summary disposition, but it's absolutely a frivolous lawsuit. In fact, in our motion for summary disposition, we're also asking for attorney's fees. And the other thing too is we got to go after these guys. And I'm seriously, like with the Andy Hess and these other things, once we get these things dismissed out, going to turn around and go after them for either malicious prosecution or abuse of process, because that's what this is. They know, right? You look at what's happened to Andy Hess, and what's happened with Marion, they know process is punishment. Right? They got to hire lawyers to come out and represent. They got all the time. He got the time away. Andy's been found guilty of nothing. He had to surrender his CPL. He had to get rid of all the firearms he had in his house. Every time we have a court hearing, he's got to get time off from work. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But that's how they operate. So that's my. These are just the latest of cases. I've been doing this stuff for 24 years. These are just the ones that are kind of most on the front burner. But this is a serious threat to our constitutional republic, right? And we see what they're doing at President Trump at the national level, but they're doing it to Andy Hess. They're doing it to our electors here. They're doing it because they want all of you to be afraid, right? They want all of you to be afraid. We're not afraid. If anything, we're going to sharpen our swords and make them, and be ready for this battle even more. Hopefully, I think with the 2020 election, opened our eyes. I think we're, for the most part, the Republicans, the Republican Party, even the lawyers, people are sleeping at the switch because I don't think they realize how bad this could actually be. And it's bad, and we know it. But all of this is designed to silence all of you. Don't let it, because that's the only way that they're going to win. And so we just gotta keep fighting. We gotta, like as a Marine, I never quit, and all of you should never quit. And I'll have your back too. Thank you for coming out tonight. All the work that we do at the American Freedom Law Center is pro bono. So we don't charge a penny for the work we do, but we're a 501c3. I know Marion handed out some of these flyers. There is on the last page. There's a way if you want to fill out something, give a donation. We'd greatly appreciate it. There's some green envelopes too. Like I said, I know Mary and I were talking about earlier about. She said, we need to have like litigation insurance, for for people who are involved in this thing. And I said, well, you do. You have American Freedom Law Center, but we need support for the, to do the stuff we do. It obviously takes money to do it, but we don't charge our clients for all the work we do. So if it moves your heart to want to support the work that we're doing, support our defense of Marion in the civil case, I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for coming out.